Hello my friends, welcome one more time to FHP Books. I am Felix and I write about films, I write about cinema in my blog fhpbooks.com. I also write about other stuff, but mainly about cinema and mainly about cinema from the 60s, the 70s and the 80s, about classic movies, about cult films. But today I want to talk about movies that are even more classic than these from the 60s and 70s. I briefly want to talk about silent films and about the first classic films with sound in the 30s, because I am publishing now in my blog these reviews. I am publishing now in my blog reviews about movies from that times, from the 20s and from the 30s. I'm publishing reviews, analysis, film critics, commentaries about movies that were made more or less 100 years ago, 90 years ago, and I am publishing this kind of movies, this kind of film reviews now in my blog. So to let you know that you can find in my blog in fhpbooks.com, you can find now my reviews about great, awesome classics, great movies that were pioneering the cinema in general, not only their genres, but also the cinema in general, like for instance Metropolis by Fritz Lang, a great film, a great German film by German expressionist filmmaker Fritz Lang. Metropolis you will find there soon. My critic, now at the moment where I am filming this video, it's not yet there, but it will be there in the next days, so don't forget to take a look at FHP Books. I will publish my film critic on Metropolis. I will publish my film critic on Nosferatu, on the first Nosferatu, the original one from 1922, also a German movie, also German expressionism by Friedrich Wilhelm Murnau, probably the first film about Dracula, about the vampire, about this legend about Dracula, that was based actually in the novel by Bram Stoker that was written in the 90s of the 19th century, and Nosferatu by Friedrich Wilhelm Murnau was made 1922 and was the first movie based in this novel, in this great novel by Bram Stoker. And actually the director and the production of this movie, they had some copyright issues because the widow of Bram Stoker was still alive and she sued this productions company for doing this movie without permission and so on. Also Metropolis is a great movie. Metropolis is one of the first science fiction movies, and in Metropolis we see also a lot of interesting symbolism, interesting informations, and it can be considered maybe the first dystopic science fiction movie. Before George Orwell wrote his 1984, 1984 was published 1949, and also Aldous Huxley made his great novel Brave New World that was written in the 30s. And before that, in the 20s, like 100 years ago now, more or less, Metropolis was made, Metropolis by Fritz Lang, that also talks about a dystopic future, about a totalitarian, transhumanistic future with the woman, the robot woman that we see in Metropolis, that is also much, a lot of years before, a lot of decades before Terminator was made. Terminator is the most well-known classic film about transhumanism, about robots and so on, also Robocop, of course. In the 80s, this kind of issues, this kind of topics became very, very trendy, but much before that, a lot of time before of that, a lot of decades before of that, Metropolis of Fritz Lang is one of the pioneers. Is maybe the first movie that talks about these topics, about these issues. So Metropolis, you will find Metropolis, my film critic, about this great film, about Nosferatu, about other movies like, for instance, surrealist movies by Luis Buñuel, the first Luis Buñuel movies. Luis Buñuel was a great Spanish director that he was also very active later. He was very active from the 40s, 50s, 60s. In the next decades, he lived many years in Mexico. He also lived many years in France. He has these two periods, the Mexican period and the French period. But before of that, he started with silent movies, and his first movies were Un Chien Andalou, One Andalusian Dog. It was made in France, and it's a silent film. It's a short film. It's a surrealistic film on this vanguard of that time, of the 20s, surrealistic current, this surrealistic vanguard current that was also in the arts, very popular in the time, with his friend Salvador Dalí. Salvador Dalí, the great Spanish painter, that was also a surrealist, of course, and so on. So these kind of movies, I will talk about them. Also, The Seashell and the Clergyman, that was made even before Un Chien Andalou. The Seashell and the Clergyman is also a surrealistic kind of movie, experimental kind of film, silent film from the 20s, that was inspired, or actually it was written by French playwright Antonin Artaud. Antonin Artaud was a French playwright who also inspired this surrealistic current. He is the father of the so-called theater of cruelty, and Antonin Artaud was also very important for the development of some other experimental filmmakers, like for instance Alejandro Jodorowsky, who you may know about his movies El Topo, Holy Mountain, Santa Sangre, Holy Blood. So Alejandro Jodorowsky was also inspired by the surrealists, of course, by Luis Buñuel, Salvador Dalí, Antonin Artaud, also Fernando Arrabal, who was a colleague, a friend of Jodorowsky. Fernando Arrabal, also a Spanish playwright, who made also some surrealistic films later, much later in the 70s, post-surrealistic or neo-surrealistic, as you may say. Anyway, these movies, surrealistic, silent films, experimental films, the first films, the first movies, the first cinema. I'm going to talk about that in my blog fhpbooks.com, so take a look. The reviews will be there, and see you in the next time. Goodbye.